and Commissioner Greg Nani, second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, opposed? Abstentions? Travis, the minutes of the meeting are approved. Does the department have any opening remarks before we go into public comment?
Yes, Chair Lee, thank you.
Mhm.
The department would like to thank Landon, our student interpreter, who is with us tonight, for helping out with the meeting. He was with us a week ago Monday at City Council and did an excellent job, so we'd like to thank him. And also, I'd like to thank all the commission members, as well as Mr. Young and Mr. Newberry, Ms. Arnett, and others for helping out at tonight's meeting. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Public comment session. Travis, do we have anything?
Mr. Chair, as I stated earlier, we do have two attendees, just to give instructions on how, if they'd like to participate during the public comment session, if they open their participant window and raise their hand, or their chat window and click raise their hand, we'll recognize them. And not seeing either of the two participants raising their hand, and one of the participants being a petitioner for an upcoming agenda item, I don't believe there's any public comment.
Okay, so we'll move on to our old business item. The first on the list is PZ 5-20 Wildwood Family YMCA. Mr. Newberry, are you reading?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
PZ 5-20 Wildwood Family YMCA, care of Tim Peters, Executive Director, Wildwood Family YMCA, 2641 State Route 109, Wildwood, Missouri 63040. A request for a change in zoning from the NU Non-Urban Residence District with an amended conditional use permit to the C8 Planned Commercial District upon a 9.34 acre tract of land, which is located on the west side of State Route 109, south of New College Avenue. St. Louis County locator numbers 24V410198 and 24V410187. Street addresses 2633 and 2641 State Route 109. The subject property is designated Cultural Institutional Overlay District under this current town center regulating plan. Proposed use: maintain the current not-for-profit recreational land use with associated parking and related accessory activities. Ward 1.
thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich, it looks like Tim Peters has joined us.
Yes, sir, he
Welcome.
has. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, before the department begins its report and presentation on the same, it failed to mention that Officer DeGalder is here tonight. We appreciate that and thank him as well. And to Mr. Peters, thank you for attending.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the department has prepared for your consideration tonight its information report, along with recommendation for consideration. The department, in preparing its report, reviewed the information from the public hearing, which occurred approximately 2 weeks ago, along with the file that has been maintained regarding the Wildwood Family YMCA since its initial zoning in 1999. As is referenced in the department's report, the property is governed by a conditional use permit that was amended when 3 additional acres was added to the site, and the original zoning is retained on the site, the NU Non-Urban Resident District. It's critical to mention that because the NU Non-Urban Resident District is a residential zoning designation and isn't necessarily set up to accommodate intense type of non-commercial uses. It accommodates it under the conditional use permit process, but certainly may not be the best fit. Important also to note is that the Cultural Institutional Overlay District, when that was formulated back in the early 2000s, the YMCA property was included in that Cultural Institutional Overlay District, which meant it became part of Town Center. And as you know, Town Center is developed under the philosophy of new urbanism and has a number of different approaches relative to building placement, heights, architecture, and many others. So the department describes in its information report, we have a site that the underlying zoning district designation is residential. We have a conditional use permit that's being utilized now in town center in the cultural institutional overlay district. What that equates to is maybe a not perfectly round pig trying to fit into a perfectly round hole. And so from that perspective, the department in conversations with the Wildwood Family YMCA recommended that it consider changing its current zoning with the conditional use permit that's been amended to the CA Plan Commercial District. And what that achieves in many regards is more flexibility for the Wildwood Family YMCA as it moves forward in this new decade, 2020 and beyond, as well as more consistency with the town center requirements of the city of Wildwood. So tonight, the department has a report with recommendation that supports the change in zoning to the CA Plan Commercial District. Such will be consistent with the property to the north, Wildwood Square, a more commercial, but certainly a non-residential use. And I believe will complement the St. Louis Community College's facility, the Wildwood campus, and do no harm or impact to the Meadows of Wildwood. The reason I can say that particularly for the Meadows of Wildwood is there are no proposed changes to the physical characteristics of the site as part of this rezoning. And the conditions that are part now of that planned district that is being proposed by the Department of Planning ensures that the tree masses along Route 109 and other locations on the site are preserved. But it does do several things that I think are beneficial for the long-term viability of the Wildwood Family YMCA, as well as this part of town center. It does allow a certain level of growth for the YMCA in terms of structure or building square footage under a site development plan review process without necessarily triggering a new public hearing. That level of growth is about 30% of the existing allowance of almost 47,000 square feet. It also accommodates 2 additional outbuildings beyond what is being indicated either on the approved site development plan or the amended site development section plan that was part of the packet of information. It gives more flexibility with setbacks. Instead of 50 feet and 30 feet, generally we're speaking about 25 and 20 feet. It also memorializes all of the roadway improvements that were completed at the time of Wildwood Square, the St. Louis Community College Wildwood campus, and the Meadows of Wildwood. Prior to that, access to the site was strictly from State Route 109. New College Avenue has been added, as well as Generations Drive. And finally, it's important to note that there are no TGA, traffic generation assessment requirements, given that all parking spaces are existing. That consideration would follow if there is an expansion and more parking's added on site. Public space is not required at this time, again, because no new parking spaces are to be provided. At the conclusion of the department's consideration, it believed that having the CA Plan Commercial District improves the long-term viability of the Wildwood Family YMCA here in Wildwood, allows for a level of growth through the site development plan process that would be managed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and currently addresses all of the existing conditions that have occurred over time, like the roadways and the centralized wastewater treatment plant that were never anticipated as part of the amended conditional use permit. So we're updating and creating an ordinance that would reflect current conditions. We're granting flexibility to the petitioner, the Wildwood Family YMCA. And then again, finally, we're ensuring that the characteristics of the site are protected for the future as well. Therefore, tonight, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the department has a favorable recommendation regarding the rezoning request. If there is a favorable action by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the petitioner will have 2 to 4 weeks to review the conditions before they are finalized and presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission for final recommendation. With that, Mr. Chair, after the floor is open to discussion or a motion is made, Mr. Newberry and I will be available to answer any questions regarding the department's report and recommendation. And as you can see, Mr. Peters, the executive director of the YMCA facility, is here also to participate. Thank you for your attention, and the department certainly appreciates it.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I'll open the floor up for discussion or a motion.
I'll move to support the department's recommendation.
Okay.
Second.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Beatty and a second by Mayor Boland.
No, actually, I wasn't a second. I think someone else did, but I just wanted to ask a question.
Okay. First, let me get the second. Who seconded? Oh, Commissioner Werther, second. Okay, Mayor Boland, you have a question.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is a question for Joe. You may recall at the last meeting, I mentioned the issue of how well the area between, in the 50-foot setback between Highway 109 and the current building of the YMCA looks, thanks to what they and the department presumably did back when it was developed. And I'm specifically talking about the old growth trees and just how it really blends in with our city. And I noticed in the recommendations, there are conditions relative to, there are a couple that I picked up on relative to that. Would you, Joe, like to mention for the rest of the commission what those are at this point?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. The department retained the 50-foot setback requirement both for structures, buildings, and parking along Route 109. And as you know, our grading code protects setbacks from disturbance, those structure, building, and parking setbacks in this case. And in the landscaping requirements, which is on page 9 of the department's attachment B or report, there are a number of items that talk about preservation of existing vegetation and, again, compliance to the grading code itself. So again, acknowledging the commission's support of that protection of those trees that are in that area of the site along Route 109, the department did its best to address it as part of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, and I am supportive and appreciate those conditions being there and the YMCA agreeing to those.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on the floor to support the department's recommendation. Commissioner Grignani.
Yes, I have a couple questions for Mr. Vunich. One is a little bit in regard to Mayor Boland's concern about the tree line along Highway 109. How much of that tree line is actually in the highway department's right-of-way?
Commissioner Grignani, none of it actually. When I calculated the 50-foot setback originally and now retained it as part of this recommendation, we did that calculation, Travis and I, based upon the edge of the property line, which corresponds to the edge of right-of-way. And so all of those trees that have been retained over time, as you can see here, are clearly within the property of the YMCA.
Okay, thank you for that.
Headed line.
Thank you for that. And my second question pertains to the amount of any improvements to the property in terms of the size of the building. You have in the report that it cannot exceed 48,000 square feet, and it's currently 36,000 square feet. But then you go on to say that it can't be enlarged more than 30%, which would only take it to 36,008 or 46,800 square feet, or 46,000, yeah, 46,800 square feet. So I'm wondering if there's a problem that there's basically two different measurements there.
Well, the original conditional use permit and thereafter when amended, recognized the building has basically a unique design in its interior. The footprint is clearly 36,000 square feet. That's what, so to speak, is placed on the site itself, but there's a upstairs. And so that adds the additional square footage inside the building to a total of 48,000 square feet. So what the department is saying, that is the footprint for all intents and purposes can be expanded by almost 10,000 square feet without necessarily triggering a new public hearing. What that would correspond to is then an increase in the overall square footage, which probably needs to be addressed based upon what you just described. So I will investigate that, because it says allowable expansions may occur relative to the building and its footprint. So I did address it. I apologize.
Okay,
So just view it as the balloons at 36,000 and 48,000. It could expand up to potentially 58,000 and 46,000 before having to go back to public hearing.
okay.
Thank you for the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, let's move to a roll call vote.
Commissioner Bagnani,
Yes,
Commissioner Beatty,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler. Commissioner Depler, I think you're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Chair,
Yes.
Councilmember Worther,
Aye.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Motion passes. Mr. Newberry, are you going to read the review of proposed regulations?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Review of the proposed regulations minus full report in association with PZ 3-20, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request to consider the development of new legislation to possibly be included within Chapter 415 zoning ordinance of the city, of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood relating to properties that are located within the City of Wildwood that present unique histories of use or character, which must be considered needing greater scrutiny and protections due to their environmental legacies, site, soil, and/or physical characteristics, or proximity to a stream, creek, or ephemeral drainage ways that ultimately presents a higher than acceptable risk to the public if they are to be disturbed, developed, and placed into active use. Such situations necessitate the need for the consideration of new special procedures overlay district with associated regulations that provides a minimum level of protections to all parties that are assessed as necessary while ensuring a thorough and complete review and comment period for the community, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich, floor is yours. Mr.
Mr. Chair,
Vunich?
would you like me to start?
Yes, go right ahead. I'm sorry. I must have cut out. Go ahead, Mr.
I
Vunich.
missed- Okay. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, before beginning the department's discussion of its set of new regulations relating to the special circumstances overlay district, it wants to note a couple of points. First, as is referenced in the introduction letter that's attached to the regulations, the proposed regulations, the department has not completed its information report. There is a reason for that. The department wasn't being lazy, but this is an entirely new set of regulations. And from the perspective of the department, it has the potential to be very unique, more restrictive than anything we have in the zoning ordinance at this time. And so the department really wanted to discuss this at length with the commission members before finalizing its report and then making changes to the draft set of regulations. Secondly, it does want to acknowledge City Attorney John Young. Over the course of time, since the latter part of 2019 and 2020, he has been requesting and we have been discussing how best to approach this. I don't know if I've hit the mark or not. Certainly, that is another reason why it is very much a draft process at this time. I'm seeking Mr. Young's input as well. Saying that, the department has prepared a set of proposed regulations. I think if you took the time to look at them in very great detail, you'll see that there's a lot of consistency or a lot of likeness between our planned residential development overlay district regulations, the PRD. The process, at least in terms of some of the reviews and actions, is very much similar, but in many regards, it's very different. And so tonight, I just wanted to highlight several of the key components of the special circumstances overlay district, and then kind of let you tell me, as the Department of Planning, what we've done right and where we've missed the mark and some of the things we might have missed. First and foremost, I think in the statement of intent, it captures it pretty well. The intent of this overlay district is to create a more protective zoning process for our residents, future buyers, and others. More so than the planned residential development overlay district, this particular process would more focus on the assessment of public and environmental hazards than, let's say, a conventional land use process. The origins of this discussion come from the Ellisville Bliss sites, which is inclusive of the Bliss properties, formerly the Callahan property, and others. All of those have taught us many lessons over the last 22 plus years. And I think the outcome of this special circumstances overlay district is reflective of that. In terms of the statement of intent, the Planning and Zoning Commission endorsed 11 components for this overlay district. And those 11 components fit well, I think, into the statement of intent. The first 4 talk about the process as it begins. The next 4 identify things that need to be included in any potential ordinance authorizing the overlay district. And then the last 3 really focus on what happens when the project begins, and then equally important, when it ends, and how we protect people thereafter. The draft regulations also would be applicable in all zoning districts. As you know, environmental hazards don't recognize residential versus commercial versus industrial. Oftentimes we find them in all locations. Activities in industrial or commercial areas can contaminate, and certainly in residential areas, we have a prime example of that with the Ellisville Bliss sites. In terms of the modification of district regulations, as you know, a key component, the overlay district allows us to take a site and the conditions that exist on the site, as well as the patterns of development around the site, and tailor that ordinance to fit those 3 or more conditions or characteristics. I think at the bottom of page 4, we make bolder or clear statements that in no instance do public space allocations include an environmental hazard as defined by the federal, state, county, or local governments. We also say that at no time will we allow land disturbance within setback areas, except for access or utilities, preservation locations, or tree canopy requirements to be diminished. So what we're saying is we're going to set a base level of environmental protection that certainly will, for all intents and purposes, ensure that the Tree Preservation and Restoration Code, the Natural Resource Protection Standards and Procedures, as well as our public space requirements and setback requirements are protected. Moving to procedures, which is in the middle of page 5 of the draft regulations, any request for a special circumstances overlay district would go to the Development and Zoning Review Committee. That is a new entity, and it seems to work well for the planned residential development overlay district, and the thought was to proceed forward with it. The next several pages speak about the application process, the preliminary development plan, and how to proceed to submitting a request for such to the Planning and Zoning Commission. One of the key components of a planned residential development overlay district, which is carried over in this particular instance, is deductions of gross acreage to create the net acreage, which determines, in most instances, the density of development for residential units. In this case, we've added 2 new ones. We've basically said any land that is designated or controlled by an environmental covenant that is established by either federal or state governments cannot be used in determination of net acreage or add to the density of a particular project. Also, we basically said that our resource protections, if they're designated at a 30% or greater slope, sinkholes, wetlands, or ephemeral drainage ways, they cannot be used to create net acreage for the purposes of density. So we've taken floodplain, we've taken right-of-way, and now we've added these 2 additional items. Also, in terms of the council action, we've included the 2/3 majority vote for any favorable recommendation regarding a special circumstances overlay district that would come from the Planning and Zoning Commission. In terms of standards for the consideration of such, we've added public health and safety considerations as well as remediation efforts as components of that consideration process. And on page 10, item L, conditions for approval, we've added the suggested inclusion of the state's land disturbance permit requirements, as was recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Thereafter, the remainder of the components are consistent with what we do in terms of approval processes, submittal of site development plans and commencement of construction under a set of timelines, submittals for changes, appeal process, and trust indentures. And the trust indentures do include wording relative to protecting not only the first set of buyers, but subsequent buyers, and also ensuring that remediation and any activities of a like type are identified as well. So again, it's the first brush of this particular overlay district that's being considered. There's a lot of information there, and certainly the department does not believe it's addressed all the concerns that the commission or our city attorney may have. But we are at a starting point. Now, I think the department would like to hear from all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. So are we actually ready for an action item here or not?
Mr. Chair, I think it would be premature to take a vote, as I would hope is that tonight you all would provide feedback to Mr. Young, our city attorney, Mr. Newberry and I, and then we'll refine those regulations and then complete the information report, kind of giving a trail from where we started, the input you all provided as the commission, and how we got to where we are at the next meeting or whenever that may be.
Okay, I'm trying to move, so hang on a second. Let me find a place that won't be as, it's okay, it's messed up. Hang on, I'll go downstairs. We have two new puppies, so they woke up, so I'm trying to move someplace else. So that's been kind of fun, but it's been a little hectic.
Good luck,
Happens
Mr.
when you
B.
have your daughters at home. One of them's mine.
Yeah.
The dogs, not the daughters. Mayor Boland.
What do you say?
Yes, Mayor Boland.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple of thoughts. First of all, I want to thank Joe and the city attorney and whoever may have participated in this for bringing it forward. In general, I have a presumption against more regulation, but I think I could see in specific situations where this might be beneficial to the city. And I'll just, we can think about that between now and the time it comes back. I just had a couple of specific comments, though. The first is, and I recognize that there's a statement of intent on page 3, item B, with respect to what I think is trying to describe where we want to move with this. That said, I think it would be beneficial to have a provision that specifically states this is what this is intended specifically to apply for, period. So these are situations where it applies. The implication being if it's not listed, then it doesn't apply. So that my reason for mentioning that is to avoid someone wanting to use what might otherwise have been envisioned as a very good thing to extrapolate from that and broaden it to a situation that we as a city simply don't intend to be the case. And then second of my two specific comments is on page 7 under item I, the density limitation method of calculation. I would ask that be either that it not contain, the SCOD shall not contain either more dwelling units than otherwise permitted by the requirements of the underlying zoning district, or acreage, either one, or if we can't do both, I would ask that it be acreage as opposed to dwelling units. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boland, Mayor Boland. Councilman Werther.
Thank you, appreciate it. Mr. Vunich, just to point out one item, and maybe the way I'm reading it, this puts on a greater restriction. Down on page 10, section M, item 1, the talks about the site development plan being submitted within 12 months for approval, and that one such extension shall be allowed for maximum of 6 months. Is the intent here to go ahead and start locking down on those site development plans and put a firm timeline on those so we don't have delays and requests for extensions going on and on and on?
Yes, sir, Mr. Werther. I think the covert Corsair process kind of taught us a lesson that if we have a good zoning, it should stand on its own merits despite the Great Recession and many, many different things. And hopefully maybe memorializing it more clearly in this particular overlay district will achieve that end.
Okay, I appreciate that. Then does that run afoul of just a typical rezoning request, whether it's for a subdivision or something in the town center? If we have this requirement here, limiting it to one extension versus what we may do somewhere else?
Again, I think with this particular set of regulations for this overlay district, we're looking at a completely different set of sites. I view the PRD or any of the other plan districts as being more greenfields. And you really meaning that greenfields that aren't characterized by environmental hazards or just the most severest of physical characteristics associated with the site. And so this overlay district, in the opinion of the department, is intended to really look at these tough sites and say, no, we're not going to let you have density here. We're not going to let you have density here or square footage over there. It's really, you need to refine your project to almost something that's of a lesser extent, not a greater extent, so to speak, as the PRD sometimes allows.
Right, okay. All right, I just wanted to be sure I was picking up on the intent. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Vunich, I have one question, and that is, how are we going to define this for a person who's filling out an application and applying for zoning or overlay district?
It's a very good question, Mr. Lee, and one I struggled with and ultimately decided that we could hopefully touch upon tonight, or if not, I would certainly have a conversation with the city attorney. What the department would like to do is actually do some predetermination of these types of properties and have a map with a corresponding list and say, boy, if one of these comes in, here's the only thing you can do, and it's the special circumstances overlay district. Otherwise, it's a not developable site under a PRD because it doesn't fit the characteristics. So I don't know if that's a legal step, and I'll defer to Mr. Young to respond.
Well, my thoughts on this are we will have to have it defined because somebody applying for zoning approval using our current ordinance and descriptions, and then we throw this on top of them after they've already cut some sort of a deal is not in the best interest of the city. It would be better to have it identified up front, and then that would determine the steps required to get your entitlement through zoning.
I like that direction. It's just, is it legal?
I think to answer the question, if it's legal, can we go through and identify city properties that are essentially risk properties and put the overlay district over those properties? Yes, I think we can.
Good.
I would recommend that we do that. Mayor Boland.
Well, I was just going to say, relative to your question, Mr. Chairman, it's possible that the point that I raised earlier relative to one of my two specific points about having a provision, presumably at the beginning, that would give more concreteness to exactly and specificity to exactly what this new body of regulation is intended to cover and therefore not cover would be beneficial in regard to your point that you're trying to get to, I think. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Joe.
Concur. I think there is a correlation between the first point the mayor made and what you've just said, giving potential users or property owners, developers, whatever the term may be, an idea of this is a tough site, nothing else will work here, and maybe the special circumstances overlay district is your only option.
Any other discussion or a motion?
Just to be clear, I didn't think the department was seeking a motion tonight.
We have it on the agenda, so we would have to take a motion to postpone this. As I understand it.
Yes, once we've heard all the comments, we have a couple of options. We could postpone to a non-date certain, which probably would mean the department would have something back to you in 2 to 4 weeks. Or if you want to hold this open and we could have further comments at the next meeting. So it would be, I guess, tabled to May 4th, the first.
7:54 p.m.
Sorry, I don't know who's talking. I wish they'd stop, but it's
That
probably.
sounded
on my
like
computer.
Alexa.
Yeah,
Yeah. Commissioner Helfrey.
So maybe I might be just missing the boat on this. So what we're saying is you're going to come up with a list of properties that this would possibly apply to. But then we're also, it would be open-ended, because if another property would end up that is not on your list, but we find out has problems that it should be on this list, your list will be open-ended. Is that correct? My second question, and then I'll mute myself so that you can answer me. My second question is, once we develop this overlay district, will the people that own the property currently be given notice that their property's on this list, or will it not be until the property's sold, which then somebody may never know? I'd like to know how those people that would potentially be on this list would know about it. Thank you.
and again, thank you for the questions. I think it has to be structured in a fashion that does allow an open-ended approach, meaning we'll identify those that we know of as the city of Wildwood and maybe include something akin to these sites, but not limited to just these sites. And that if there is another site that isn't identified, kind of consistent with what the mayor and Mr. Lee have said, we need to then give those characteristics in more detailed fashion. So I think it has to be open-ended, Ms. Helfrey. And then secondly, I think before the commission would take final action on the recommendation that they would make as a group, I believe that if we have a list of properties, we need to notify the owners. So at least you can hear from them as well.
Mayor Boland.
So I would, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move, given the discussion, that this matter be postponed for 60 days to allow the department to consider input from the commission this evening and any additional input from our city attorney and so forth, and then return at that 60-day point with a subsequent report for the commission's consideration.
Okay, we motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Helfrey. But Travis, I think I have to, well, let's see, we can vote on this motion. So roll call vote.
Commissioner Beatty,
Yes.
Commissioner Kepler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Gragnani,
Yes.
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Worther.
Aye.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, to you and to all the others, thank you for your input. We'll see what we can come up with, Mr. Young, Mr. Newberry, Ms. Arnett, and I.
Thank you. Moving on, we have one new business item. Mr. Newberry.
A review and determination regarding the renewal of an existing conditional use permit in the amended C8 Planned Commercial District granted by the City Council via resolution on May 13, 2002 for a telecommunications tower and related equipment shelter, PZ 16-99 Sprint Spectrum LP. The commission must consider renewing this permit on an annual basis. This facility is located on the north side of Clayton Road, east of Strecker Road. Locator number 21U 120226, street address 16497 Clayton Road, Ward 2.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. In 1998, the City Council by resolution approved a conditional use permit for this facility, which is located on the northeast corner of Clayton Road and Strecker Road. At that time, the petitioner argued that there was a major gap in service in this area because the intersection and surrounding properties sit at a low elevation relative to areas around it. The tower started at a much greater height, but eventually was approved again by resolution by City Council at 100 feet. It's been an integral part of the network of telecommunication services in Wildwood since that time. And as you can see, not only do we have service providers inside the tower itself, the hollow tower, there has been so much growth in demand for the services by them and others that we've allowed canisters and antenna to be placed on the exterior. All done with the intent to make it as minimal as impact as possible on the surrounding viewscapes at the intersection itself and surrounding properties. Over the years, there's been a struggle at this site. The original shelter didn't turn out quite as well as people had hoped from an architectural standpoint. Landscaping's died over the course of years and not been replaced. Minor maintenance has been missed at times. That all really changed when Crown Castle purchased the site. And as you can see, in 2020, this is the first year that we've gone out there and everything, at least from the department's perspective, is in excellent shape. The bollards are painted, the landscaping is healthy, the structure itself is in good shape, and all of the components on the tower are workable and comply with the permit conditions. One of the key components of that resolution that was approved by City Council now almost 22 years ago was that after the initial 5-year period that the tower was placed upon, each year a renewal would have to occur. That renewal would be reviewed and acted upon by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And as you can see from the report Mr. Newberry's prepared, over the years, we needed that renewal process to get the shelter, the tower, and the lot to the condition that it is today. And so tonight, Mr. Newberry and I are recommending that the tower be granted its yearly renewal because it is in full compliance with the permit.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Before I get started, Mr. Young, you have a comment? No? Okay. I'll open for discussion and a motion. Mayor Boland.
So I'm not going to make a motion, just an observation. I suspect that with respect to this CUP, I get this may be a question for John Young, that we're not able to do what I'm going to suggest. So I will just speak generally going forward. It would be nice, assuming the law allows for it, and I'm not sure it does. I think we've had some recent changes in that area in our state, but to the extent it is allowable going forward, it would be nice if we could maybe do some things to require disguising of these towers. I mean, in this case, I know other cities do that in other states. You know, you go to Palm Springs, they look like a palm tree and you really can't tell the difference. And it's just nice aesthetically. So even in this case, if we're not able to go to that extent, if we could at a minimum get them to paint the tower to something other than a bright white that might match the woodlands, just an observation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. Any other discussions or motion? Commissioner Greg Nine.
Yes, I recall reading in the report that it said that there were white stripes left on the tower from the banding, and I guess I'm seeing those white stripes still in the pictures that were taken recently, and I'm wondering if those need to be corrected.
Based upon the department's observation, when that did occur, that's when they removed the exterior wires and then did replacement. They did paint them over. Now, has the paint faded? We didn't notice it when we were out there at the site, but certainly can take another look at it.
If you look at the picture that's showing on the screen right now, the one on the right has a white stripe between, at least I'm seeing actually two white stripes between the bottom array and the tubular thing in the middle,
Those are actually
like white
intentional.
stripes.
I'm sorry. Those are actually intentional, Commissioner Gragnani. That's part of the canister network that houses the antenna, or the parts that broadcast the signal.
Okay, thank you.
Good catch, though.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Helfrey?
I'll make a motion to approve. I drive by there and walk by there every day and I think it looks great. So compared to what it was, so I make a motion to approve.
Okay,
I'll second.
a second by Commissioner Beatty. Seeing no further discussion, roll call vote. Mr. Newberry?
Commissioner Depler.
If you said Depler, I'll say yes.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes,
Commissioner Gragnani,
Yes,
Commissioner Beatty,
Yes,
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Worther.
Abstain.
Thank you. Mayor Boland,
Yes.
Passes.
Thank you.
One abstention. Moving on, we don't have any site development plans or no other items, so I guess we're at the end of our meeting here. Mayor Boland?
What? My apology, Mr. Chairman. Just one other thing. I just want to let everyone on the Zoom meeting tonight know that Carol Simpson from Ward 6 has resigned her position with the commission, and she's done an exemplary job representing Ward 6 while she's been on the commission. We'll let everyone else who is on the commission that's not on the call this evening know about this tomorrow. But I just want to state here how much we and I have appreciated her service. I know you all join me in that, and we wish her all the best. And I've begun a search for the replacement. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Councilman Worther, second by Cindy Depler. All those in favor say aye.
One last thing. Thanks again. We do appreciate your service. We can't do it without you.
Yep, thank you.
thank you, Joe and Travis and Kathy.
yeah, I
Okay,
would agree.
thank you.
yeah, thanks, everyone.
We'll wrap this up.
Good night.
Bye.
All right, have a good evening.
Mhm.
Good night.
Mr. Chair,